Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you again. My name is Dustin Cormier, and welcome to How to Rock Astrology. For those of you who have been continuing to watch, we are just about to continue talking about Saturn, its nature and cycles, from Stephen Arroyo. In our previous video, I just did a little freestyle thing, turned into a half an hour of me flapping my gab, but that's okay, I like to do that. Now we are going to actually start coming from Stephen Arroyo's Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. It's a classic text written by a guy who's really a counselor, an astrological counselor first. And he's also got a spiritual tone to all of his things as well. As usual, for each of these little chapters that we start, there's a astrological wheel. We've gone past Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. Now, the chapter on Saturn starts with Leo, interestingly enough. Saturn and Leo always have a sort of interesting connection. Leo being the opposite of Aquarius's advanced sign, Aquarius, as opposed to Capricorn. And this is how we start off today's chapter, Saturn. It's an old Chinese proverb that says, "One moment of patience may ward off great disaster. One moment of impatience may ruin a whole life." It's an old Chinese proverb. And that particular proverb relates very, very deeply and truly to the nature of Saturn. Patience. Your capacity to be patient. And what is it that gives patience? A person who has a strong Saturn is patient. But the reason is because how they've been born, what they've been born into, and how they've given themselves so many checks, so many grounding, anchoring things that ground their experience of life with responsibility and duty. Being responsible and dutiful to something, whether it's your health, your relationship, your job, something, even your beliefs, your Jupiterian aspirations, something that you've committed yourself to has given you a grip, an anchor in this reality, so that anything that happens, it's okay. It's all part of the waiting game. It's all part of me waiting my turn to contribute to what I love doing so much. Now, as usual, this is a live stream, so anybody who is watching live, you can feel free to make a comment, ask any questions, and I'll try to ask them as befits the nature of today's discussion on Saturn and its cycles and transits. So, starting off with Stephen Arroyo's text, this is chapter 5 on Saturn, its nature and cycles. Until recent years, the planet Saturn was usually referred to in most astrological books as a malefic influence, a dimension of experience that most people would rather not face, but which merely had to be endured for no positive purpose whatsoever. As someone who's bridging the gap between tropical Western and tropical Vedic, I'm a Vedic astrologer as well, and I think that the ancient Vedic astrology gives Saturn malefic character, but it also gives Mars and the Sun malefic character. And that malefic character is for positive purpose, and it can be a good thing, although it is burning and destructive and tough and difficult and enduring. I would say that Saturn is a malefic, but all malefic qualities in the human energy field have their proper place and purpose in the grand scheme of things. So I would still call a Saturn a malefic, and it does bring challenge and difficulty. But Stephen Arroyo continues. A constructive trend in the development of modern astrology is that many authors in the past decade or two, this is written in like late 1970s, 1978. Many authors in the past decade or two have referred to the more positive, growth-promoting meanings of Saturn. Stephen Arroyo makes a little footnote at the bottom here, as you can see. And he says, among these more positive approaches are the following books. The Transit of Saturn by Mark Robertson. The Horoscope as Identity by Noel Till. And one that shows especially deep insight into the psychological meaning of Saturn with great originality and clarity is a book called Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil by Liz Green. She's very well known to be the Saturn girl. Since this more positive approach is currently becoming more widespread, Stephen Arroyo says, I do not feel that it's necessary to present all the rationalizations which could be used to convince the reader that Saturn does indeed have many positive meanings. However, I do feel that the actual function of Saturn, especially as it transits through the various houses of a chart and aspects the various natal planets, it can be further clarified. And that's really what this whole part of the series is going to be about. This clarification is especially needed in outlining Saturn's impact on psychological and spiritual transformation. Let us first briefly state some of Saturn's most important general meanings. Saturn can be viewed as A. The principle of self-preservation and contraction, which can manifest purely as defensive, fearful attitudes, or as conscious striving toward the achievement of one's ambitions in the world, and a fulfilling of one's duties and responsibilities, contraction, the yin to the yang. It can thus indicate a personal contraction of being inward toward greater self-reliance and inner strength. That's a great little picture there, a condensed picture of Saturn. B. Saturn is the principle of form, structure, and stability. Hence, it is related to law, cultural and social traditions, the father, and all authority figures. C. Saturn also relates to the principle of time and of learning through immediate experience, which comes only from repeated lessons in life. Immediate, direct confrontations. Hence, this Saturn principle leads to many of the commonly mentioned Saturnian qualities: seriousness, caution, worldly wisdom, patience, practical economy, and conservatism. Saturn is correlated with the Greek god of time, Kronos, who metes out strict justice impartially and impersonally, but also with very little mercy. Saturn can be known for this kind of tough confrontation with reality. Saturn is also related to crystallization, i.e., the old patterns of life and personality that get more rigid over time. The learning that takes place over time may cause Saturnian people to be closed off from life, and hence self-oppressive, skeptical, wary of anything new, and it can also make them hesitant to reveal their true feelings. But the same kind of experience can lead other people to develop a sensitivity to enduring values. It's the positive side of Saturn. Can lead to an appreciation and capacity for moderation, for orderliness and efficiency. And in some cases, it can lead to a detached and peaceful wisdom. These are the kind of qualities that can come from anybody who has a very important planet placed in a Saturn sign, that being Capricorn and Aquarius, or if Saturn is prominently placed in anybody's chart. Not typically including the rising sign, because Saturn actually has a hard time in the first house. It gains directional strength when it's closer to the 7th house, because then the person doesn't identify too heavily with Saturn. Saturn being in the first can bring out more of these tough, negative aspects of Saturn, as well as Saturn in Aries. This includes Saturnian people being closed off, self-oppressive, skeptical, wary of anything new, hesitant to reveal their true feelings. When Saturn's closer to the 7th house, closer to Libra, when it's got positive aspects, and if it's your Atmakaraka, and Saturn being your Atmakaraka can go one way or the other. The Atmakaraka is a Vedic technique. I recommend you look it up. It's, for me, the most clearly true, deep aspect that you can find in astrology. Venus is my Atmakaraka, and that's why I'm so fucking pretty and fun and happy and lovey. So if you have Saturn as your Atmakaraka is determined by the highest degree in your chart. If Saturn has the highest degree of any planet in your chart, then you're a Saturn person, and you will either express the good side or the bad side of Saturn. Probably both at some points in your life. But it'll probably dig into being very negative and conservative and functional for its own sake ultimately, or on the other hand, for a positive Saturnian placement, any prominent Saturn placement can make you sensitive to enduring values, can make you appreciate and have a capacity for moderation, and makes you orderly, efficient, and in some cases, such people can even have a detached, peaceful wisdom. Likely the best guru type people, the best sagacious people who just sit and are calm and are happy. The Mujis and Sri Yukteswars and trying to think of that new trending old fella, Sadhguru, the Sadhgurus of the world. These are guys who have Saturn, who have inner peace, who are chill, and can perpetuate that chillness because they know that there's no red signals going off in their vehicle. There's no engine light on their vehicle because they've been taking care of what they are intrinsically since they were young. And they know just what they're unapologetic about that. That's what a good Saturn can do. So anyway, that was only C, talking about what general figures for what Saturn is. Now we're going to go on to D. D. Saturn, what does Saturn represent? Saturn represents the urge to defend one's life structure and personal integrity, and the urge towards safety and security through tangible achievement. E. Saturn represents, according to Dane Rudyard, a person's, in a way, it refers to a person's fundamental nature, the purity of one's true self. It seems that Saturn has come to have such negative meanings in the minds of many astrologers and students of astrology, because most people do not live in terms of their fundamental nature, but rather in terms of fashions, social patterns, and traditions, and ego games. Hence, Saturn is often experienced as a stern approach or a challenging act of fate in order that we begin to heed the needs of our fundamental nature within. Saturn is indeed a rough taskmaster, as many of the old books say, But it's particularly rough when we have deviated from manifesting our true nature. Damn, that's so good. That's such a great one from Dane Rudhyar. Keep that one in mind, because that one's sticking out in my head as being what Saturn really is. Why Saturn people look so tough. Why you gotta be so mean, Mr. Capricorn? It's because they are having a stern reproach in being honest about their own fundamental nature, if and when their Saturn is well placed. If not, then they might just be stern for sternness' own sake. It's the trickiness here. Now, F. What does Saturn represent? Psychologically, Saturn represents a dimension of the ego complex, which can, and usually does, become rigid with age. In other words, that deeply ingrained group of behavior patterns and attitudes which can tie a person in knots of fear. Saturn is also correlated psychologically with what Jung calls the shadow, i.e., those parts of ourselves which we block, fear, or about which we feel guilty. And hence we project those qualities onto others. Saturn has been said to symbolize the Achilles heel in the armor one wears before the world, the instinct of withdrawal from life. But, as Rudhyar points out, it also signifies the deep-rooted ambition to actualize the potentialities inherent at birth. This ambition is felt as an inner pressure to become or to achieve something definite according to our inner pattern of potentialities. The sun may be those potentialities themselves and the desire to see them manifested. But Saturn is the desire to manifest them, to realistically do, to challenge yourself internally, to become and achieve those things that are accorded with our inner potentials and patterns. They seem similar, and that's why both Saturn and the Sun are karakas, are significators for the Father. Discipline from above, from within. I guess it's discipline from above, but in Saturn's case, it's within, compounded by the pressures from without. Whereas the Sun, it's just purely from within, if that makes sense. I digress. The point is that while the Sun wants to see the inner potentialities manifested, and it's the content of those manifestations, it's the drive to get something of myself out there. Saturn is the it's the desire, the ambition towards the inner pressure which drives a person to be capable of manifesting what the Sun seeks to be seen as the results of one's creation. Saturn is the vessel, the donkey, the real vehicle for transmitting the starseed that is the Sun. So that's Arroyo's little word about everything. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm afraid that I can see that you're asking me about very specific things, but today I'm trying to talk about a Saturn specifically for the collective. If you would like to message me personally on my email, you can catch me at astrology@dustincormier.net if you'd like to ask about a personal reading. For now, I'm trying to keep the conversation suited towards the conversation at hand, talking about how Saturn relates to everybody. So feel free to continue asking questions. I've just got to say that once in a while. For anybody who's looking for specific readings related to you, unless you give me a simple one that I can just say something simple to. Give me complex ones, and I'm afraid that I can't speak to it in a public video like this. Okay, so moving on. As usual, though, this is a live stream, so feel free to, for everybody watching, feel free to ask questions, and I'll try to speak to them as I can. Now, Stephen Rowe, sorry. Got to stay hydrated, folks. Saturn says. Got to keep yourselves alive, and that's what I got to do too. So anyway, Stephen Rowe continues. Of all the general meanings of Saturn, probably the most important is that Saturn represents concentrated experience and learning, which only comes through life in the physical body, in the material plane, through time, through the resistance of matter, and through the pressure of being incarnate in a physical body. We have the opportunity for developing a greater level of concentrated understanding and greater patience in our attitude towards life itself. Saturn is often said to rule the dense material plane. When one incarnates into the physical world, the energy field is constricted and thus concentrated. That is why an earthly life is such a good learning experience. For here we learn through depth of experience, concentrated work, and through seeing the immediate results of our actions. The pain, tension, and pressure of earthly life is therefore has an evolutionary and developmental purpose. Very cool. There's a reason why we incarnate into this physical world to do what we do here. The material plane is, as the poet T.S. Eliot writes, the point of intersection of the timeless with time. Saturn is the planet of time. And through the Saturnian experience of living in the material world, where everything moves so slowly, and where we have to work so hard to make anything happen or to grow in any way, one can make the greatest spiritual progress. This is very important in terms of spirituality. For anybody who's just thinking that Saturn's this annoying material world thing that I gotta get out of the way in order that I can do my spiritual work of the sun, Saturn's part of it. And in fact, it's actually the gate, the greatest narrow gate to the heights, the best of yourself. Saturn often seems to go too slowly, and our patience is tested at every point along the way. But persevering through the inert resistances of matter clearly shows us what is enduring and what isn't, where we meet the tests and where we fall. Saturn's action clearly shows us the cost of our desires and attachments. It starkly reveals the limitations of our ego. And it shows us that a highly concentrated consciousness and in-depth understanding are the main things we can take from this world when we leave it. It shows us the value of work, for all the wonderful beliefs and ideals ever thought of by human beings are of little value if they are not applied to everyday life through effort. Saturn's pressure should therefore be taken as a helpful push toward doing the work that we need to do in order to develop at a deep level, rather than as something to dread and to try to escape from. Saturn's heat and pressure are needed in order that we can develop what Buddhists call the diamond soul, or the diamond body, which is a way of saying our fundamental innermost nature. However, Saturn alone, without love and lightness, is rigidity and death, when not taken in context with Venus and the moon and all the other parts of the chart. When mental when mental and emotional fixations and blockages result from the extreme expression of Saturn's principle, the negativity that builds up crowds out the true love essence and energy of life, and the soul starves and withers, since it then lacks the very water of life. This is why everything needs to be in a balance, right? Hence, complementing Saturn is Jupiter, and in some cases Neptune, in the sense that of Stephen Arroyo's sense. For we need not only effort, Saturn, but also grace, that being Jupiter and Neptune. Not only immediate experience and reliance on proven facts, Saturn, but also faith, it's Jupiter and Neptune. Effort and grace operate simultaneously. They are two sides of the same coin. Through effort, one opens a channel through which grace may flow. Hopefully. And if it doesn't, then you got to question it. Without one's making that effort, the Saturn, the grace doesn't readily come into the person's life. However, it should be pointed out that an individual rarely makes any effort in the field of spiritual growth unless grace prompts them to do so. That's why, of course, Jupiter is the ruler of astrology, and Saturn is the planet of greatness, but Jupiter rules astrology. It's just a level that you got to understand. So hence, there is little grace without effort, but neither is there much effort without grace. So we see that Jupiter and Saturn, as well as Neptune and Saturn, symbolize complementary pairs which should be related to each other in any work with birth charts. And this is true. This is a common and very constructive astrological method. Seeing the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn. Anytime Saturn and Jupiter come together in transit in a certain sign, what house is that? And what does that mean in terms of the progression of the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction? It's a common Western thing that might mean different things to different people based on the nature of their chart and what Jupiter and Saturn means to them. For some people, it's important stuff. Saturn should not be overemphasized, for, in many ways, the action of the Trans-Saturnians is much more powerful and deeply transforming than Saturn. Although I would, as he's probably going to say, you can't access those farther planets without Saturn. Saturn shows us the true nature of the material plane, the influence of necessity in our lives, how things really are from the practical objective viewpoint, the Zen functional viewpoint. But the Trans-Saturnians, the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, these show us what is possible on planes of being and levels of consciousness that totally transcend the material world. Saturn leads us to experience the limitation that is an inherent characteristic of the material world. Hence, anytime Saturn in the natal chart is activated, one has to deal with the fact of limitation in some dimension of one's life. In other words, one learns that on this plane, you just can't have everything, and neither can you be everything that you might have fantasied. The Trans-Saturnians, the outer planets, on the other hand, point us toward planes of being and dimensions of experience that are characterized by their being unlimited. They are vast, and they hold out the promise of unlimited growth. Now, oh, cool. I'm just looking at our comments, and my friend Magi, I hope I'm saying your name right. You've said thank you for sharing this information, and I'm so glad to do it for you, my friend. Thank you very much for watching. Now, Stephen Arroyo continues. From the viewpoint of spiritual progress, Saturn is of the greatest benefit in two ways. First, it shows us slowly but surely what the reality of the material world truly is, once all of our wishes, hopes, fantasies, self-deceptions, and desires are out of the way. Secondly, the Saturnian experience of the material world tests us in every step we make in our development. Saturn allows no room for self-deception, escapism, or rationalization. Saturn tests how concentrated our spiritual growth really is, and how concentrated our consciousness is. Through Saturnian experiences, we have to answer the question, now that the chips are down, does our supposed spirituality or self-knowledge enable us to meet this karma with grace, acceptance, and patience? It seems to me that many souls are religious between incarnations, when they are dwelling in various subtler regions of creation that awe the mind with their light and splendor. But the ego submerges that awareness of higher realities as one grows and develops during an earth incarnation. And so only those who have achieved a truly concentrated focus of their life energy towards a spiritual ideal can retain a clear attunement to those higher vistas. Only those who are truly devoted to the spiritual aspect of life and who are beginning to transcend the ego and worldly attachments can still maintain that high orientation in the midst of the pressures of the earth plane. And I often like to point out that it's physicality, it's constant concentration, it's the lived experience in the physical world that bears this out. That's why I often say that meditation is really the central figure of all personal growth. But I like to also advocate physical yoga as a very crucial, not for everybody, but a very crucial and functionally useful way of getting the rhythm of the contraction of the mind and the openness of the mind, the contraction and the openness in a logical, discerning rhythm. Using the physical body is a great way for the deeper transcendental vistas of the mind and meditation to go and to explore and to be centered and to face the self-realization of the illumined inner light. All of these things are much easier to do if you've been connecting your neurological experience in a physical way, because the body and the mind are one. Most people have some subliminal stirrings of memories, Neptune, of higher planes or of dream worlds, heavens, or of a state of being that was better and more completely satisfying than what they now presently feel in the present. But the memory is usually out of focus and has the effect in most cases merely of making the individual discontented and unhappy. It's Neptune. Why isn't my life the way I feel it should be? Instead of just looking at the reality. According to the spiritual teachings of many times and places, only some type of concentrated meditation can enable us to retain the perception of the ideal with a clear focus. That process should begin now, in this very lifetime. And by constant practice, one can increase the focus of attention on the higher levels of consciousness day by day. Hence, one might say that Neptune represents the urge to escape from the limitations of the material plane and to merge with a greater, more refined absolute oneness. But it is Saturn that has shown us the need to seek that escape, to find that way towards increasing oneness and liberation, to find that path. It's different for all of us, even though the transcendental planes of inner subjective bliss attainment might be quite universal and similarly shared to all of us. We all fell out of heaven on a trajectory in a certain way, and we all have to resolve our karma in a different way, channel our bodily energies in a certain way, in order that we can be functional, have the mental capacity to deeply be satisfied with and enjoy however those outer planets, the Trans-Saturnians, bring that inner heavenly transcendental state of consciousness and bliss. However we do that, through meditation, through our art, through being in a family, through crying at the satisfaction of being in a family, whatever brings that inner thing, that awareness, that concentration. It's going to be Saturn that helps us to provide a path to resolve what we are now into that greater bliss that we've always been. Yeah, so that was good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I can see that we've got some likes and some of you are. So thanks for watching, folks. If you are watching live right now, we're going to continue this session. I'm probably going to go to the bathroom, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to continue our discussion of Saturn, talking about Saturn in the natal chart. That'll be the discussion of the next video coming up. So stay tuned. I'm going